Boom.
Rosie clearly demonstrates in this portfolio an exceptional ability to develop ideas through sustained investigations. Looking in particular at the artist Ellie Smallwood, she is able to do a forensic investigation into the texture and form of skin and looking at her male members of her family and producing portraits which have a really interesting dynamic to them, which is informed by contextual research exploring masculinity and the family dynamic. This demonstrates really exceptional analytical and critical understanding, and she demonstrates fluent use of appropriate specialist vocabulary. For assessment objective 2, Rosie performed really well. She was developing her work in lots of interesting and exciting ways. You can see in her sketchbook she experiments with composition, she looks at different types of materials, she also experiments with scale. The final piece is a very large series of A0 mixed media paintings. But you can see that she's selecting appropriate resources as she goes. She's reviewing and refining in a confident and purposeful manner as work develops. So the AO2 for this work is particularly strong. Arguably the strongest assessment objective for this portfolio would be AO3, drawing and observation. You can see that Rosie's incredibly gifted with her drawing and she produces some really nice studies of her models. But also she has got a really good ability to record in terms of annotations, and some of her work using photography shows a really good ability to reflect critically on what she's doing and explore the idea of tone and composition in a really interesting way. For Rosie's final piece, she has investigated all areas of her book, and she's showing an exceptional ability to present a personal and meaningful response. The final piece itself consists of two large A0 mixed media paintings which demonstrate an exceptional ability to realise the intentions, and you can see there's all of the different elements of her research, all of the different strands are interwoven together to produce something really exciting. There's exceptionally clear and coherent, accurate use of language throughout her sketchbook, and you can see all different elements of the work coming together in a really exciting and interesting final outcome.
The starting point of this project was freedoms or limitations, which I started to explore by looking at Duchamp's string and how it is physically limiting. Another way that art can be physically limited is through use of the body, and I practiced using parabolas created by extending my arms and drawing on the floor with charcoal. Although as I drew, I looked at the texture that charcoal makes, and although this was a portrait, I didn't draw my subject's face because it was obscured at the time, but I wondered if his suit being a typically masculine symbol was part of the portrait. I continue to look at texture and mark making, both in charcoal and ink. As the aim of my project, I wanted to look at portraits, but to continue working in charcoal and looking at mark making and how very free brushstrokes can be used, I looked at Ellie Smallwood and particularly her depiction of skin. Here I've looked at different ways of combining both extreme pink and red colour palettes with charcoal. Portraits, I think, need to be very expressive, and so I looked at different aspects of a portrait. I think hands are very expressive, so this is what I've looked at. And Ellie Smallwood tends to combine charcoal with paint, so I've aimed to develop both styles. Eyes are also a key part of the portrait. But to get a better sense of the person as a whole, I've looked at drawing people from an anatomical perspective. Charcoal can be used in different ways, and since I've been looking at mark making, I looked at different ways I can apply the charcoal and different styles of life drawing. I continued by only drawing male subjects. This is of my brother, and I completed a series of portraits of him in different styles in charcoal, which I then developed by laying paint over the top of them. I also photocopied the portraits and layered those on top of each other to see how layering can distort or increase the effect of an image. Here are some male roles in other paintings. Thinking about my final piece, I carried out a photo shoot of different subjects, but I decided to go with those of my dad and brother to keep with the theme of masculinity. Although at first I really liked the idea of combining paint and charcoal, as does Ellie Smallwood in these paintings, I found the colour palette very difficult to work with, as it was so extreme. Although I still like the idea of layering, so I've gone back to charcoal and wanted to really develop that before moving on to paint. Here I've worked onto different backgrounds and used both charcoal, black charcoal and chalk to develop tone. Looking at a different approach to applying paint, I've looked at Emma Hopkins, who uses black, white and red paint predominantly, which is mixed with water. I tried out layering paint onto my charcoal drawings. Also thinking about size, Ellie Smallwood tends to fill the page, and here even the outskirts of the head are cut off, and she fills the page as I have done here. Here I've gone back to life drawing, but taking Emma Hopkins' style of paint and applying it. I thought it was interesting that all my models were male when in a lot of cases when I was looking for subjects they were predominantly female, and I thought it was interesting looking at more slight models as opposed to the model who which is typically thought of as beautiful for men who would be more muscular. Whereas I think Emma Hopkins' portraits seem very intimate. Yeah. One way I developed the intimacy of one of my life drawings is by adding red paint, which I think is quite visceral, and the dripping paint is quite emotional. Next I had to combine both charcoal and paint. I think that worked well when working with only black and white, but when it came to colour I found it more difficult. Here I used coloured pastels, but since I was unable to mix them, I found the colours weren't as subtle as I'd wanted. However, when I used watered down acrylic paint, I was able to use more muted colours. Here I looked at how I was going to compose my final piece. And here they are.
Cats, boom.